Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
Welcome to another lecture. So in our last class, we had started with the 9th chapter of Class 8 Alternative English, which is the Great Stone Face Part 1. Now what we've read so far in the chapter is about this great stone face that was a piece of nature. It was a work of nature. And when seen from a distance, it certainly resembled the face of a man. But if you would look at it from very near, you would only see a pile of rocks which were stacked together. Now, the story is also about a young boy whose name was Ernest. Every day after his work was over, he would sit with his mother and would look at the stone face. His mother told him about the prophecy. It was believed that one day a man whose face would resemble the great stone face would come to the valley and he would be the greatest and the noblest man of all times. Ernest was waiting for such a man to appear, and there was a day when it was, it spread across the valley that Mr. Gather Gold, who once belonged to the valley and had left it for his business purposes, was now returning back to the valley because he wanted to spend his last days there. And the people of the valley were sure that this was the man whom they had been waiting for. This was the man who resembled the great stone face, and he was welcomed in a similar manner. But when Ernest saw the face of this man, he was highly disappointed because he found that man's face very unkind, very shrewd, very, wicked. And according to him, that was not the great stone face at all. So let us now begin with the second part of the video, and we'll try to make out whether Ernest was able to find his great stone face or not. So, the years went on and Ernest grew to be a young man. He attracted little notice from the inhabitants of the valley. They saw nothing remarkable in his way of life, except that when the labor of the day was over, he still loved to gaze upon the great stone face. Their idea was that this was a folly, but pardonable, because Ernest was industrious, kind, and neighborly. They did not know that the great stone face had become a teacher to him, and that the sentiment which was expressed in it would enlarge the young man's heart. And fill it with deeper sympathies than other hearts. They did not know that from this would come a better wisdom that could be learned from books. Neither did Ernest know the thoughts which came to him so naturally in the fields and at the fireside, were of a higher tone than those which all men shared with him. A simple soul, simple as when his mother first told him the story, he beheld the marvelous face looking down the valley and still wondered why its human likeness was so long in coming. Yes. So as the years went by, with the passing years, Ernest grew up to be a young man, but he attracted little notice from the inhabitants of the valley. Inhabitants, the people who lived in the valley. So the people of the valley did not notice him much. They did not see anything remarkable in his way of life. Remarkable, something very unique, something very, explicit, something very highly motivated. So there was nothing special that they found in the kind of life that Ernest lived. The only thing that they knew was that when the labor of the day was over, when Ernest was done with his work for the day, as he had been doing when he was young, he still would sit and would gaze at the great stone face. Now, their idea was that this was a folly. The people of the village thought that what Ernest was doing was wrong. Folly, it was not correct, it was a crime. But it was pardonable. Pardonable, it could be excused. He could be just forgiven for that wrong that he was doing, just because Ernest was very industrious, hardworking. So he was a very hardworking boy. He was kind and neighborly. He always helped his neighbors. He was a very social person. They did not know that the great stone face had become his teacher, and that the sentiment which was expressed in it would enlarge the young man's heart, and they were not aware of the kind of sentimental bond, emotional bond that had developed between Ernest as well as the great stone face, and the sympathies that were there in his heart. So he did not know what a big, kind, sympathetic heart Ernest had. They did not know that from this would come a better wisdom that could be learned from the books. They were not even aware that according to Ernest, whatever he was getting, his kindness, his sympathies, his goodness, his wisdom, knowledge. So whatever knowledge Ernest was getting, it was all because of the great stone face. And according to Ernest, he could not have got this from the books, what he got from the great stone face. Neither did Ernest know that the thoughts which came to him. So, not only were the people unaware about a lot of things, but even Ernest did not know that all these thoughts which came to him so naturally, whether he was working in the fields or he was working at the fireside, when he had to put on fire, they were of a higher tone. What do we mean by higher tone? That the thoughts which came to Ernest's mind, they were very noble. They were kind. They were beyond the imagination of a normal man than those which all men shared with him. So, he was just beyond the other people of the valley. He was not like them. He was totally different. He was a simple soul. He was a very simple kind of a man. Simple because when at first he was told by his mother about the great stone face and the prophecy related to the great stone face, he beheld the marvelous face looking down the valley and still wondered why its human likeness was so long in coming. Beheld is to look at something continuously. Marvelous, amazing. So, ever since his mother told him about the prophecy related to the great stone face, there was not even a single day when he stopped looking at the great stone face and wondering that the man who looked like the great stone face, why did that man take so long in coming to the valley? By this time, poor Mr. Gathergold was dead and buried. His wealth, which was the body and spirit of his existence, had disappeared before his death. Since the melting away of his gold, it had been generally agreed that there was no great likeness, after all, between the ruined merchant and the majestic face upon the mountain. So by this time, what had happened? Mr. Gathergold had been dead. So Mr. Gathergold was now dead and he was buried as well. The wealth that he had, which was believed to be the body and spirit of his existence. Body and spirit of his existence means his wealth, which was supposed to be so important for his survival. that also disappeared before his death. So when he was alive, he continued to lose his wealth. He got ruined. Here it is written, ruined merchant. Merchant means businessman. Ruined means somebody who's lost everything. So he lost a great deal in his business, and in order to pay back to the people, his gold was also being melted. Whatever gold he had, it was being melted, and the money was being paid off to the people. And when this was happening, the people of the valley agreed that Mr. Gathergold did not resemble the great stone face, whose face was so majestic. Majestic, magical. So they finally agreed that there was no similarity between the face of Mr. Gathergold, who according to them was a merchant, a businessman who had lost everything in his business, and the great stone face that was such magical and pure. It so happened that another son of the valley had become a soldier many years ago. After a great deal of hard fighting, he was now a famous commander. He was known on the battlefield by the name of Blood and Thunder. Old and tired now, he had lately expressed a desire to return to his native valley. The inhabitants, his old neighbors, and their grown-up children prepared to welcome the renowned commander. It was being said that at last the likeness of the great stone face had actually appeared. Great, therefore, was the excitement throughout the valley, and many people who had never once thought of glancing at the great stone face now spent much time gazing at it, for the sake of knowing exactly how General Blood and Thunder looked. So, what happened? After the chapter of Mr. Gathergold was over, and after the people realized that he did not resemble the great stone face, another son of the valley, that means another person who was born in the valley and had become a soldier many years before, he was returning to the valley. So after a great deal of hard fighting, since he was soldier, so obviously he fought for the country. He was very brave and very strong. So he became a commander. So he was a soldier, he became a commander. And in the battlefield, he was known by the name Blood and Thunder. He was now old and tired, and he expressed a desire to return to the valley. Desire, wish. So he had this wish that he wanted to return to his valley now. The inhabitants. Now this word we read, on the previous page as well. The inhabitants means the people who lived in the valley. So the people who lived in the valley, his old neighbors, his family, everybody in the valley, they were prepared to welcome the soldier who was now a renowned commander, renowned, famous. So this famous commander, they were all ready to welcome him. It was said that this commander certainly looked like the great stone face, and since it was believed that his face resembled the great stone face, so the people of the valley were highly excited. And those people who never ever looked at the great stone face earlier would now spend a lot of time looking continuously at the great stone face, just because they wanted to know how the General Blood and Thunder looked. So they had not seen that commander ever in their lives. But they thought that if they would look at the great stone face and understand its features, they'd be able to recognize Blood and Thunder as well. On the day of the general's arrival, Ernest and all other people of the valley left their work and proceeded to the spot where a great banquet had been prepared. Soldiers stood on guards, flags waved, and the crowd roared. Ernest was standing too far back to see Blood and Thunder's face. However, he could hear several voices. "It's the same face exactly," cried one man, dancing for joy. So, the day when General had to arrive, Ernest and the other people of the valley, they left their work and they proceeded. They moved to the spot, to the place where a great banquet had been set to welcome the commander. Banquet, feast. So there was a huge meal, there was a huge party that was planned in his honor. Soldiers stood on guard. So the soldiers were waiting to welcome that commander. They were waving flags in their hands and the crowd was roaring. The crowd was cheering for this commander. Now Ernest was standing a bit far away from where Blood and Thunder arrived, and he could not look at the face of this man. But he heard somebody saying and claiming that this is the same face that the great stone face has. And speaking that man started dancing because he was happy that finally the man who looked like the great stone face has arrived. Okay. "Wonderfully like it, that's a fact," replied another. So the other man replied to it that yes, exactly. This is the kind of face that the great stone face has. "And why not?" cried a third. "He's the greatest man of this or any other age beyond a doubt." And then the third person added on to it that of course, and why not? He certainly is the likeness of the great stone face because he's the greatest man of this age or any other age. Ernest at last could see the general's face. And in the same glance to the side, he could also see the great stone face. If there was such a likeness as the crowd proclaimed, Ernest could not recognize it. So finally, as the cloud gradually dispersed, Ernest was able to see the face of the general. And to the same side, so the side where the general was standing, that very same side, the great stone face was also visible. So after looking at the commander, Ernest looked at the great stone face, and according to him, the kind of likeness that people announced. So as the people were announcing that the great stone face and the general had so much of similarity, Ernest could not find anything similar in the two faces. "Fear not, Ernest," said his heart, as if the great stone face was whispering to him. "Fear not, Ernest, he will come." So, Ernest was still not satisfied. He was not happy with what he had seen because the prophecy had still not come true. And then he felt as if the great stone face was whispering to him, was telling him to not worry, that the man, the likeness of the great stone face, would certainly come to the valley one day. So my dear students, with this we come to the end of this part 1 of the story. So what did we read in part 1? We read about the great stone face, that it was a work of nature. It basically was a piece of nature wherein huge rocks were placed one upon the other. When one would look at those rocks from a distance, it would seem to resemble a great face, the face of a man. But if you would go near to that face, you would go near to that particular, pile of rocks, you would not see anything in it. Now, Ernest is the name of the boy who lived in a log cottage, in a cottage made of wood with his mother. And he was a wonderful son. He was very dutiful. He helped his mother in whatever way he could. And his mother told him about a prophecy. Now, what was the prophecy? It was believed that one day a man would come to the valley whose face would resemble the face of the great stone face. And that man would be the greatest and the noblest of all. Ernest got so affected by it that he started waiting for that man to appear. As he grew up, he became more and more hardworking. The first person who came to the valley and whom the people thought was the likeness of the great stone face was Mr. Gathergold, who was a businessman. Now, Mr. Gathergold, who was a businessman, he obviously thought that he was, first he lived in that valley. He was born in that valley. But then he went to a port which was a bit far away from there. He set up a business of his own. He earned a lot of money and the people believed him to be the great stone face's likeness. When Ernest saw it for the first time, he got disheartened because he was not the man. He believed and he assumed that the great stone face actually told him not to worry and that the man would certainly arrive. Ernest grew up, he became more hardworking, he became industrious, he became neighborly, and his attachment to the great stone face increased multifolds. He took the great stone face to be his teacher. He got all his kindness, his sympathetic behavior, and his wisdom from the great stone face. At that time, another person was rumored to be the likeness of the great stone face, and that was Blood and Thunder. He was a soldier first, again, who was born in that valley, but then, because of his courage and bravery, he became a commander and was popularly known by the name Blood and Thunder. Now, Blood and Thunder came to the valley. People again announced that the likeness, the similarity between Blood and Thunder and the great stone face was there. It existed in real. But again, Ernest did not see that at all. And once again, he believed that the great stone face was telling him to keep calm and to be patient, that man would certainly arrive one day. So my dear students, I hope the first part of the story was clear to you. Let us proceed towards the back exercises. So write true and false against each of the following statements. The great stone face stood near where Ernest and his mother lived. False. We have read that the great stone face was miles away, but it was believed to be very much next to them. One would clearly distinguish the features of the stone face only from a distance. True. One could see the similarity of the stone face with a man only from a distance. Ernest loved his mother and helped her in her work. True. Though not very rich, Gathergold was a skillful merchant. False. He was rich and he was ruined. This is the word, if you remember, has been used for Gathergold. He was ruined. Gathergold died in poverty and neglect. So when he died, he was poor. True. Remember, it has been written that his wealth disappeared before his death and his gold was being melted away. The great stone face seemed to suggest that Ernest should not fear the general. False. The great stone face only suggested to Ernest that the man whose face would resemble the great stone face would certainly come to the valley one day. So what was the great stone face? As we have read, the great stone face was a work of nature. We've read that on the perpendicular side of the mountain were gigantic rocks that were piled one upon the other. And when viewed from a distance, those rocks seemed to be like the face of a man. What did young Ernest wish when he gazed at it? So what did young Ernest wish for when he would look at the face? He wanted the great face to speak, because according to him, he would be a very pleasant, it would be a very pleasant sound that the great stone face would deliver, would speak in, and he was looking forward to hear that. What was the story attributed to the great stone face? Attributed, connected. So what was the story associated with the great stone face? Now it was believed that someday in the valley would arrive a man who would be born in that valley, and in his manhood, when that boy would become a man, the face of that man would resemble the great stone face, and he would be the greatest and the noblest man of across all the ages. What gave the people of the valley the idea that the prophecy was about to come true for the first time? So for the first time, the people of the valley presumed that the prophecy was going to come true when they heard about Mr. Gathergold. Mr. Gathergold was a man who was born in that valley but had gone to a distant port because of his business. And now, after earning a lot of wealth, he was returning back to the valley so that he could spend his last days there. So it was then when for the first time the people believed that Mr. Gathergold was the man. Did Ernest see in Gathergold the likeness of the stone face? No. Ernest was very disheartened and disappointed when he saw the face of Mr. Gathergold, because according to him there was no similarity whatsoever. Who did he confide in and how was he proved right? So confide in means to share your feelings with. So with whom did Ernest share his feelings? Ernest shared his feelings with the great stone face itself. He looked at the great stone face, hoping that it would answer and tell him when that man would appear. And how was he proved right? He was proved right when he believed the great stone face answering him back that that man, the great man, would certainly appear in the valley. Okay. What made people believe General Blood and Thunder was their man? So now came the second person. It was General Blood and Thunder. Why did people believe him to be the man? Because he was again a man born in the valley. He became a soldier first, and then owing to his bravery, he became a general. He got famous by the name of Blood and Thunder and was now returning back to the valley to spend his rest of the life there. So once again, the people became hopeful that this man was certainly going to be the likeness of the great stone face. Ernest compared the man's face with the stone face. What did he conclude? So when Ernest compared the face of Blood and Thunder to the great stone face, he was again proved wrong. The people were announcing him to be exactly the way the great stone face looked, but Ernest could find no similarity in them. And thus Ernest was very disappointed, but once again the great stone face came to his rescue and told him that the man would certainly come.